Penn State's wide receiver recruiting just took a hit for the class of 2025, and Penn State's got to turn it around or there could be more bad news on the way.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Lex Cyrus chooses South Carolina over Penn State, and it might get worse before it gets better. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch. Every single day, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Brian Smith is back, the recruiting expert for the Locked On Podcast Network. Let's talk about the leaders in job recruiting, since this is an update in recruiting, and that is LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Lex Cyrus, Taz Williams, Koby Howard. What does Penn State do if things really do get that bad and they do not end up with any of the three wide receiver prospects that we've been mentioning now for weeks, Brian? Over the course of this week, Penn State was starting to lose ground on Lex Cyrus. They're starting to lose ground on Taz Williams. What's the deal with Koby Howard? It was, look, you've said it all the time. This is recruiting, but now Penn State has lost another top in-state Pennsylvania prospect purely. Forget about it being a wide receiver. They lose another Pennsylvania kid that leaves and spurns Penn State. So this is not good news, and it might get worse here.
This is the landscape of recruiting. Kids don't look at borders like they used to. They don't even look at regions in some cases like they used to. That being stated, I'm going to make a couple predictions. Zach, one thing is for sure. A lot of these kids are going to pick a school like South Carolina is not very good, okay? Coaching staff semi on the warm seat, could become hot. Let's see how they do this year. They're still in the SEC. Good luck, because they're one of the bottom 6 to 8 teams every year. And number two, that's not a program like off the top of your head without looking at anything. Can you name South Carolina's recruits and starting quarterback, et cetera, that would matter to receiver? Like, I can't. They don't have anybody to rally that program. It's got to be NIL based, in my opinion, unless he's got some tie to that school. I would bet that Penn State or maybe somebody else can at least get a visit from this kid in the fall. Prove me wrong. South Carolina getting kids out of the state of Pennsylvania is still weird, but it's NIL and all that, so we'll see.
Well, and I understand if this is closer to Pittsburgh or closer to Philadelphia. He's from the Harrisburg area. So that's give or take 90 minutes, right? This is central Pennsylvania. This should be Penn State's territory. And South Carolina, it relates back to the Matt Zoller's recruitment. Missouri comes in out of nowhere and makes a push and lands the commitment. Similar circumstances here for Lex Cyrus, where it almost doesn't make any sense, but South Carolina just kept slowly chipping away. I got to imagine that NIL factored into it. I have to. Hey, we just had a full-length episode the other day, and you said, hey, South Carolina has pretty deep pockets, so don't be surprised if any of their recruitments, regardless of Lex Cyrus or not, are usually NIL-based.
If you're South Carolina and you have a history that outside of the Holtz and Spurrier time has been, let's be quite honest, pretty dreadful for the history of their program, you have to go different routes. And they've gotten kids that are elite with NIL and give them they could be their own platform and try to raise the program. I get that. But to my knowledge, they have not gotten a kid in the last couple of years that was a big-time player without NIL being a forefront in that. That's one. Two, again, the coaching staff at the beginning of this, like, hey, we're building something. Well, they haven't gotten any better. They got worse. So I'm telling you, like, if they start slow this year, or like, not that this would shock anybody, at the end of the year, they play Clemson every year. It's the instant. If they get walloped 31-10, how do you think that's going to go in the media? Because that state eats its own. I have family there. Like, they follow 2 teams. They got no pro sports. They eat their own. Like, if it doesn't go well, their fan base is rabid. They'll be all over him. They'll have kids decommit. So This is a tentative thing to me. Like kids picking schools that are out of state, out of their region for NIL, and it's a program that's a sinking ship is bizarre. But I mean, you still got to give their staff credit too. Like all those things are true, but he still has to have some kind of relationship with them, with Beamer and his staff. He has to. NIL is not going to get it alone. So you got to give them credit. Now, can they get over the hump and win 7 or 8 games? Do you expect that? Because I don't. I'm not going to look up FanDuel's numbers, but yeah, I'd bet they're 6-6 at best this year.
No, I get what you mean. That's the long game of recruiting, right? National Signing Day isn't until the middle of December, and here we are sitting in July about how recruiting spiraling out of control for Penn State, but with the need at wide receiver and everything else. And again, I don't have good news to share. Good news to share. Depending on how you look at it, you might, some listeners, viewers might look at this as a half glass full type of thing. I'm kind of on the side of a half glass empty when we get to Taz Williams, Koby Howard, and then Penn State's got to pivot and see if there's somebody else on their big board that they want at wide receiver because it's just not going the best right now. Okay, you have Jeff Exeter in the fold, and you also have Lyric Samuel. Those were your two of your primary targets, and you have them. But when you had the production that you had or lack thereof in 2023, new wide receivers coach, you got to find a way to reestablish yourself. There really hasn't been a semblance of a receiving game since Jahan Dotson. That's just the fact of the matter. And that was in 2021 when that team finished 7-6. Where are the days of, and Allen Robinson was a long time ago, but that's KJ Hamler. Right, I am naming individuals. Right, LSU's like, let's roll out this long list, and it just keeps unscrolling. Right, whereas Penn State, it's like, okay, well, KJ Hamler and then Allen Robinson. Like, I'm naming a few unique individuals. But I'm comparing apples to oranges here. Besides the point, Lex Cyrus was a must-have because you were in the lead for so long. I compared it to having a 4-touchdown lead going into the fourth quarter, and you were only up against one other school. Taz Williams now has multiple other schools that are kind of even in the thick of it for his recruitment. But I just feel like Lex Cyrus ending up at South Carolina is almost all but unacceptable. And whatever the reason is, fix it. Fix it. People in the comments are going to be like, it's James Franklin. So, Zach, you're on to it. No, it is not James Franklin's fault. I don't think it's Marcus Hagen's fault. I think it still has to do with NIL. NIL is just an issue for Penn State, and it still will be until they figure it out.
I think until Congress or however they fix this and there's some kind of allotment that you got to pay players, bigger numbers. I mean, there'll be some schools still try to do under the table stuff, but that's been the case forever. But when it's more even, Penn State will have a lot fewer problems. There are a few other schools like that too, but right now that's not the case. So they got to figure this out. Here's my solution. Again, it's the long game. Who signs is who matters. That's one. But two, Penn State needs to go out, as I've said numerous times on this show, they got to play well on offense this year in a fun and entertaining way by way of what the receivers in high school think. I know that's not friendly to what college coaches want to hear. Too bad. The kids are making the decisions, not you. This is not a Penn State problem. There are a bunch of schools that are really struggling to get the receivers they want. Because most guys don't really want to do it. It's really complex. It's hard. It's easier to run the ball and just have a mobile quarterback. That's not what receivers want to hear. They got to throw the ball around this year a little bit more. And the guy they got, he's got a bazooka for an arm. Figure it out. Some of these kids will either flip or somebody you weren't even in on. Some kid from frickin' Oklahoma might call you that's good. You're Penn State. You're Penn State. And then there's always a chance to take a JUCO kid or take a kid out of the portal. They only need like one really good kid out of the portal. With the kid, they got some good guys last year, this year at receiver. Somebody also has to develop. They've got enough bullets and they got somebody like head coach has said it. It's not a talent problem. You mentioned it the last time I was on the show.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to develop and be like, maybe he's not a pure number one NFL guy, but he's a 50 ball guy. If you don't have a 50 catch receiver at Penn State every year, it better be because of injury. That's the one thing you can't do anything about. Your dude gets hurt second game of the year. That's unfortunate. Outside of that, that should never happen at Penn State or an elite program in that room. That's just my opinion.
So that's Lex Cyrus. He's off to South Carolina. Everybody's going to want to focus towards the future. Taz Williams commits on Saturday, July 13th. Koby Howard's still out there. Brian, you have some other players that could possibly be targets for Penn State. We'll discuss that on the other side of this break. And today's show is brought to you by Gametime. You got to download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. It's summertime and I love going to Major League Baseball games. And Gametime is my choice to get Major League Baseball tickets. And as the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, it makes getting tickets faster and easier. And get this, prices on the Gametime app actually go down as it gets closer to first pitch. Take advantage of that, plus the killer last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets to not only baseball, but sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. You get flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, so you know what the price is up front, and probably the best feature, my favorite feature, seat views. You get a panoramic view of the seats, so you're not second-guessing yourself. If it's a new venue somewhere you've never been to before, it's a very beneficial feature. So take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Taz Williams, Koby Howard have been mentioned here a lot. Brian, you have some pretty good suggestions. I mean, any wide receivers that are talented, quality, and have a good standing with Penn State so far in their recruitment that are still available, Penn State should be making those phone calls. But let's start with Taz Williams because he becomes a priority. Honestly, might have even become a bigger priority than Lex Cyrus. And now with Cyrus going to South Carolina, but it's not that simple. Okay, so Taz Williams was a solid lean. People were projecting him to Penn State, crystal balls, predictions, for future casts, whatever you have it, across different recruiting services. Well, now SMU and now Baylor are trying to mix things up. That's right. The Baylor Bears are getting into the mix for his recruitment. And guess what, Brian? This has to do with NIL. Now, this isn't directly related. This isn't directly related, but I want to point out something that I reposted unironically on X. David Aranda said, he was asked about, hey, how's your recent recruiting run been so successful? And he simply responded back, we're paying players. So everyone else can try to sugarcoat it and say like, oh, it's probably not NIL. Well, Baylor getting into the mix, SMU being in the mix, it has to do with NIL.
Those are two schools, for people that don't know, are private schools, different, the donations and the following for those schools. It's a little different, it's a little niche, but if one of the mega donors says I'm in, I mean, those are still oil schools. It's in Texas. You're going to have, I mean, the pockets there, it's just different money. It just is. Any of those schools decide they want to go all in on football because somebody, that's important says so, their program can change overnight. So that's pretty wild. But I also think like Jerome Miles, I don't think they'll get him, but you got to recruit him. He decommitted from Ole Miss.
Okay.
He's a kid. I mean, he's from Utah. He's elite. He's from Utah. I highly doubt he's excited about Utah's passing attack. And BYU is terrible. So anybody like that in Penn State, like we talked about it jokingly, but it's true. California, Texas, Florida. True. I mean, there are no boundaries now. And on the other side of this, there are still some other kids that you could flip, and they've done such an incredible job. I'm not going to name specific
just not
names,
in Pennsylvania.
It is really odd. That is true. There's got to be a Florida kid, in addition to the ones that I talked to.
Koby Howard.
Koby's obviously part of that, but this is not a lie. Give or take, over under a year, they're going to have about 40 kids that just a receiver in the state of Florida that are good enough to play in the Power Four. Now, a few might fall through the cracks academically or whatever. 40. You can't tell me there's somebody they can't at least look at. Then there's state of Georgia, South Carolina, like there's somebody. And again, they can also take a JUCO kid. There are so many options here. It's not even funny. But again, it's not going to matter. It'll be all moot if they don't produce on the field. They just need to expand their board. Just, make sure, because guys develop. I mean, there could be another kid at one of the Catholic schools in DC that pops off this year.
Yeah.
You just have to keep your eyes open.
I want to rehash this about Taz Williams. Out of all the potential targets that Penn State had the best relationship with going into this 2025 recruiting cycle, like realistic ones, obviously, yeah, there are plenty of 5-star wide receivers that Penn State had no chance on. That, yeah, Quincy Porter, for example, is a much better prospect than Taz Williams and would have been a great addition for Penn State. But we're talking about realistic. Would he commit, and will he have Penn State in his final list of schools? Taz Williams is the best of the bunch. Jeff Exner, Lyric Samuel, and if Lex Cyrus happened to be in the fold, no disrespect to them, but he's just my favorite from what I've seen. So, okay, Lex Cyrus is gone to South Carolina. Taz Williams becomes that much more important. And it's a broken record, but that's what happens now. When you lose one, you have to focus all your attention on the other one. He commits Saturday, July 13th. We'll see how that one goes. And Brian, I said this a day ago, 2 days ago maybe, that between you and I, Penn State, I can guarantee that they get one of them. Koby Howard, Taz Williams, Lex Cyrus is off the board now. So now it's down to these two, and I was confident that they get the two. I still feel, I feel better that Taz Williams would have committed to Penn State over Lex Cyrus. I said that. I think I had more confidence in Taz ending up as a Nittany Lion than I did Lex. That's just based on, it's just kind of a gut feeling almost, because you never know with recruiting. But now Baylor, in a matter of 24 hours, has joined his recruitment last second. It doesn't make me feel good, and you just kind of hope that Penn State at least gets one of them now, between Koby Howard, who you mentioned, in Mills, and Taz. Taz is the preference, but you got to get somebody. You have to get somebody.
Yeah, you really like to not go into the offseason needing more than one receiver. And just from a generic perspective here, this is not related to Penn State right at this moment, but yearly, even if you're Georgia, even if you're Texas, even if you're Southern Cal, teams that are obviously, like Georgia had probably going to have the first quarterback drafted next year, blah, blah, blah. These schools go out and take like one receiver every year. Matter of fact, Isaiah Bond got stole from Alabama and ended up at Texas this year. I mean, it's not like Texas is short on receivers. Elite teams should be able to go get one guy. That's fair. You want to try to keep it there because, number one, it's NIL money and it'll be expensive. And two, it's hard to get two of them. So if you don't get one of these kids, in addition to like hoping, somebody that's already on campus develops, that's really awkward going into the offseason. Either you pony up or you're in a tough spot, because those kids are not coming without any. I mean, that's not an if, ands, or but, and you're going to pay a lot. I've heard enough of those conversations to know, and I don't really like it much, but that's the market, as the saying goes.
I'll throw out one other name. There's not much to analyze here because I don't think it's going to happen. Nashawn Montgomery is someone who had an official visit with Penn State. He's always kind of been projected to go to Florida. But Beckham Kritza, who is the quarterback in this class of 2025, conveniently posted on X saying, hey, Nashawn Montgomery, why don't you consider Penn State? More or less, right? Verbatim, but trying to recruit another potential passing target for him, all 24 hours before Lex Cyrus had chosen South Carolina. So again, it's almost kind of convenient, the timing of that messaging. Maybe Montgomery's would have a second thought if he talked to some Penn State prospects that are currently committed, but you have to get Taz Williams. And I don't want to say and or. I don't want to say or here. I think Taz Williams and Koby Howard complete this wide receiver group. If you could happen to convince a Nashawn Montgomery to move away from being projected to Florida, I think that's even better, but we'll see how this goes. The one that's having the most success here is Deion Barnes. It's kind of an uphill battle at this point for Marcus Haggins.
This is the game of recruiting. It's the long haul. You're going to have some valleys. Penn State is in a valley right now with receiver recruiting. But we were just talking about Deion like less than a month ago. We're like, what's going on with D-line recruiting? And then like 10 seconds later, we're like, oh, D-line recruiting is great.
Just like that.
It was really odd. That one was extreme. I'll grant you.
Yeah.
But that's why I don't get too overwhelmed in today's realm of recruiting, because kids change and there's always somebody else that you can go get.
He is Brian Smith, the recruiting expert here at the Locked On Podcast Network. I encourage you to check out his work, his socials, his platforms, which will be linked down in the description. Brian, thanks again so much for reacting to a commitment that didn't go to Penn State's way. Hopefully, with over 24 hours from now, Taz Williams commits to Penn State, and that's a bit of good news for the class of 2025, but we will see. It's, once again, another 50-50 recruitment. But Brian, I appreciate the time and the analysis as always.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
And as always, thanks for checking out this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Be a part of the conversation down in the comments section. What do you think about Penn State losing out on Lex Cyrus as he chooses to go to South Carolina? Do you think Penn State will be able to recover and get the likes of Taz Williams or Koby Howard? Maybe there's another prospect you like. Put it down in the comments section. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a like on it, share it with friends and family. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you're not already, become an everydayer, subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And of course, don't forget, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus the national shows covering each and every league. You can find Locked On Sports Today now available on YouTube and the free Fire TV channels app.